when I would tell nurses that I worked with the 1980s, 1990s, even in the 2000s, their jaws always dropped. We didn't have SaO2 monitors. We didn't have the lights that they have today. We didn't have the vein finders. So we knew anatomically where the veins were, where they should be.
All right. Welcome to the Investing on RN podcast. Today, I'm here with Josh as usual, and we're joined by Michelle Harris of the Conversing Nurse Podcast. Did I get that right? I don't know why it sounds like a tongue twister to me, but yeah, we're joined by Michelle, and we're excited to talk today because she's a fellow podcaster. And so it'll be exciting to talk to you about how you started your journey in the podcasting space and where it's led you today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, gentlemen. I'm happy to be here.
Where and when did you start, or what area of the hospital did you start in? How did you get involved in nursing in the first place?
Yes, I started way back, I'm going to date myself, in 1986. So I started in pediatrics and worked there for 18 years and then made the move to the NICU, the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit. And I was there for 18 years. So 36 years, long time.
I know when I started nursing, I think I started my actual first job, I think was 2011. And everybody was telling me about how much nursing had changed over the years and like how the best days were behind us, kind of, in terms of the nursing world and how things were. Did you see any of that?
Well, being in 1986, it feels like the medieval times compared to when I left the nursing profession in 2022. I retired. So yeah, lots of changes for the better. There's so many changes. I mean, when I would tell nurses that I worked with, just a few years ago about things that we did in the 1980s, 1990s, even in the 2000s, their jaws always dropped. One of the things that I love to tell nurses, because we rely so heavily on technology, right? Back in the day when I became a nurse in 1986, we didn't have SaO2 monitors. We didn't have the lights that they have today, right? We didn't have the vein finders. So we knew anatomically where the veins were, where they should be. And we did many, many blind sticks on kids. You guys know kids come in to the emergency room, to the OR. They're dehydrated, they're scared, so they're, vasoconstricted, really, really hard to find veins. And we just had to know where they were, and we had to find them by feel. So today, nurses have a lot of really highly technological tools to help them in their jobs. And so that's one of the major changes from when I was practicing way back in the day.
So that sounds like you had to do way more work back then, because nowadays you look up at the monitor from like 2 rooms away and you're like, oh, patient's good. I don't need to go in there for a while.
Yeah, Josh, I remember when we first got monitors.
Maybe.
Yeah, when we first got our really, I guess, fancy monitors. I remember the SAT probe laying in the crib and everyone rushing into the room because it said that this baby's SATs were like in the 70s, right? And so we rush into the room and everyone's looking at the monitor, but no one's looking that the probe is just laying in the bed. It's not even attached to the baby. The baby's laying there wiggling. Technology is great, but sometimes when we rely on it really heavily, it comes back to bite us in the butt.
Now, I was going to say, now it's shifted the other way with like the alarm fatigue and everything, where now the alarms are going off and nobody's even paying attention to it.
That is so true. And I guess in the NICU,
you got to stay sharp.
I know one example that I always tell. So we'll get CRNA students every once in a while, and one thing I always try to tell them is like, because you'll be trying to get a blood pressure for like, I don't know how long. Let's call it 5 minutes. It's pretty easy to tell if you can feel a pulse with your finger, then everything's going to be fine. But if you don't, then a lot of times you just got to treat their pressure until it comes up to where they can read it on the monitor. So I don't know. Yeah, a lot of these technical skills are lost because of the monitors.
Did you spend your career in California, or did you go out to other states throughout your career?
Yeah, Colin, I spent my entire career in one city, in one hospital.
So
Oh,
that
what's that like?
I was gonna say that's very so Josh, we're obviously looking at this from the investing side and from making decent money and everything, in addition to obviously like the care for people. But one thing to quote Josh is like loyalty doesn't pay in terms of your actual paycheck. So did you find that you were taken care of well because you stayed at the same place and like your loyalty did pay off to be there as long as you were?
I don't know. I felt in the beginning that it was good to be loyal. And I think towards the end of my career, I feel like loyalty wasn't um, as a thing. It was, we saw a lot of people leaving the institution. We saw a lot of new people coming. I was on the interview panel for the NICU, so we saw a lot of new people coming in from different areas. We had travelers for the first time. I think the loyalty went by the wayside. And I think that's true today. I think, especially in today's climate, people are just not so loyal to institutions. And they're, I've interviewed so many entrepreneurs, yourself included, Josh, that have really focused on expanding their opportunities for growth and for financial growth.
I think, yeah, it's definitely a different culture now. And it's not, so I mean, being loyal was important to me when I started, but then it was taken advantage really early on. And so I just got a bad taste in my mouth really early on. And then after that, I'm very skeptical of anybody that makes me feel loyal, because they're gonna, it's happened before. Why wouldn't it happen again? So I'm just very careful with giving loyalty to different institutions that have just screwed me over in the past.
Yeah, and I mean, I think hospitals have changed as well, like you were saying, and like as time has gone on, it's been a lot more about the bottom line than actually taking care of their staff and everything, and actually nurturing this environment where people do want to stay for a full career. Like I think that was a lot more common probably with your generation of nurses than it is today. And I'm working at a small hospital now up here in the Napa area, and a lot of the people that are here have been here for many years, and because it is such a great place to work, a lot of people have been here for a long time, and I can definitely see that. For the first time, I'm at a point where I could see, maybe this will be the last place I work as a nurse, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, I don't know, but or
I've
longer.
said I've said that like 3 times.
Yeah, well, you never know, but I mean, it's a great community, or like, yeah, I guess it's like a small kind of tight knit community hospital, but at the same time, the pay's not as great, and there's like certain benefits that you don't get that you get in the bigger institutions and hospitals and everything. So I think people are sticking around just because it's a good place to work, but at a certain point, we're in a position where I can do that, but other people might not be able to. So it does kind of create more of that transient environment where people are just always coming and going, looking for a little more.
Yeah, that was definitely true. Same community hospital. The, the nearest big hospital was 60 miles away. So a lot of our families are here. So that's where we stayed.
You're pretty close to like a lot of like the mountain kind of areas out there, right?
3 hours from LA, 3 hours from San Francisco, 2 hours from the Sierras. So skiing, hiking, and then really 2.5 hours from the coast. Geographically, it's a good location, I think.
Yeah. Well, and so I guess at what point did you start, looking at podcasts and kind of getting out there and interacting with more nurses?
I didn't think about podcasting until really my last year of working. I knew when I was going to retire, and I had really just recently become a listener of podcasts through my daughter, who has been listening way longer than I. But she got me interested in some podcasts. It's one of those things that just strikes you. I don't know if you guys had this, but it feels so silly to say, like, listening to a podcast one day, I was like, I could totally do this. I mean, how hard could it be?
That's kind of that's why we're here.
Yeah,
Can't be that hard, right?
it can't be that hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a real learning curve to it. But I did think about it about a year before I retired, and then started about 7 months after I retired.
And how hard was it?
It was hard. There were a lot of sleepless
Yeah.
nights and frustration. I'm one of those people that I just really like things to work properly, how they're supposed to. And I get extremely frustrated when things don't work the way they were designed. And so, setting up my website, there's so many choices to make. And I'm also a person that gets analysis paralysis. So definitely, I was like, which microphone? And you can't just Google, like, which podcast microphone is the best, because everyone's is the best. And so you're going to get, 10 different opinions on which microphone is the best and so forth. So just trying to navigate all through that. And then there was talk about, before you launch your podcast, you need to have at least 10 episodes recorded so that you're not under pressure every week to get in there and record. And what if you can't find a guest, and so on and so forth. And so I had, I think, 8 recorded, and talked to another nurse friend of mine who has a podcast. And she's like, girl, just go, just do it. Stop waiting. Yeah. And the next day, like, I launched, because I was just waiting for someone to say, it's okay. You can go. It's okay. You can do this. Just, it's going to happen, and just handle it when it happens, but stop waiting for everything to be perfect.
Was that somebody we had on our podcast also? I remember you said you knew one of our previous guests, and I know she has a podcast.
Yes, no, this is a gal, a flight nurse, and her name is Janessa Dean. And
oh yeah, so that's who we were talking about.
Oh my gosh, you did have Janessa. That's right. Okay,
Yeah.
I remember that now. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. Yeah, she's.
Yeah, I was gonna say it sounded like something she would say after our conversation with her.
She's just like, do it. Stop waiting.
Yeah. So what was, I know you mentioned listening to podcasts. So obviously you must have liked the format and just like that style of learning. But what was it, I guess, specifically that motivated you to start your podcast, speaking to other nurses? I guess, what were you trying to create for other nurses?
I think I had a desire to, first of all, learn what other nurses did, because I felt like my entire career being in pediatrics and NICU space, I was not privy to what other nurses were doing. Of course, I saw them, in the hospital, in the cafeteria, walking the halls, and I had some sense of, maybe what an operating room nurse does and so forth. But I didn't really know, and I didn't really realize how many different specialties there are within nursing. So I was curious to learn for myself. And then I just thought, there's so many great nurses out there doing so many great things, and they need to be heard. And that was my motivation for starting the podcast, just to highlight these nurses and what they're doing for the profession, and for their fellow humans. And entrepreneurial. There's so many entrepreneurial nurses.
Yeah, I think that's been kind of eye-opening for us since we started doing this, is just, first of all, how many different specialties there are within the nursing world. Like, we just interviewed a guy who's a work from home nurse, which I think is more new, but still there's just all these different things. And I know one of the things that I'm sure you've come across too is just the high percentage of nurses that are burning out more recently. And so it's just, before you even start talking about leaving nursing or finding alternative ways to make money outside of nursing, just looking at different areas within nursing where you can, either make more or the same amount of money, but find a better lifestyle for yourself, I think has been really eye-opening for us. I think like as you were going through this, what was were you kind of just surprised by like all these different specialties and I guess one question would be like, did you have any regret having not branched out into anything different?
There's cannabis nursing. Had no idea. It's not something that I would do, but I was just kind of dumbfounded, like, wow, this is a thing. This is really like, this is certified by the ANCC. And fertility nursing, I thought that's so cool. Legal nurse consulting, forensic nursing, those are all things that I did not know they were out there. And I thought, man, if I had to do it over again, I would pick one of those. And I don't have regrets about being a pediatric and NICU nurse. I loved it. It's just that if I were aware of one of those other specialties, maybe I would have gotten out of that specialty a little bit sooner, made a change, because I felt like I was burning out a little bit. So yeah, note to self.
You were a nurse for how long did you say?
36.
36 years. 36 years. So you just started feeling some burnout towards the end of your career. So what were some of the changes that you think were kind of brought that on or caused it? Because I mean, 36 years is a long career. So why did you not feel burnout until the very end?
Partially, I think COVID was partially to blame. There were things happening before that. Just the climate was different in nursing. There was just negativity, and I don't know how to put my finger on it. And it could have been just institutional. Our institution was going through a lot of changes, so I know that had to do with it. But definitely when COVID hit, I think I was one of those nurses that experienced a lot of moral distress in terms of knowing how patients should be cared for. So, I would say the last 3 or 4 years of my career, burnout was starting, and then COVID hit, and it certainly accelerated the burn.
Yeah, yeah. Well, somehow you still hung on for a couple years after that. So I guess what's that decision like? How did you set yourself up to be able to retire when you did? I know 36 years is a long career, but for some of us newer listeners, I think typically our listener is going to be a newer nurse here or newer in the career. So what would you tell somebody who's just starting out how to prepare yourself for what's inevitably going to happen in the future, whether it's retirement or just burnout to where you're looking for something else?
Yeah. So financially, how did I set myself up to retire? And I retired early. I retired at 57. So I just turned 60 this year. It's been 3 years. I envy your financial knowledge that both of you have. And I didn't have that. So here's a prime example of how foolish I was. I had already worked, let's see, I'd already worked 20 years for the institution that I worked for without contributing to a 401k. So when I met my husband, my late husband, he was much more financially savvy than I was. And he had already been teaching. He started his career as well in 1986. And so we started at the same time. And so he was already well into his career, but he had been participating in the 401k and the school system. He was a teacher, had a 403b plan as well. So he was participating in both of those plans. And he was a futurist. When people would ask him, questions like, if you could go back to any time period, what period would you go back to? He would say, I would not go back. I would go forward. I want to know what things are going to look like in 50 years, 500 years. Like, that is what excites me. He had a lot of savvy that way, and he set things up so that we were in a better financial position. And the last, 15, 20 years of my career, that's when I started contributing to the 401k. So because of my husband's forward thinking, financial sense, I was able to retire at 57, and I haven't had to go back to work yet, but that first year, every month I was like running the numbers and, am I going to run out of money? I'm going to have to go back to work. Nope, not this month. Okay, let me check again next month.
Yes. I mean, it's such a deep question that can go in a lot of different directions. And I know the first thing you mentioned was a 401k. So we don't typically speak positively about that, but at the same time, it's a great tool for somebody who doesn't know anything else, doesn't know what else to do.
Well, yeah, and
because if you don't put it there, you're going to spend it, no matter how hard you try not to.
Yeah, and I think like as like a first step, like that's great, because it's like you said, for 16 years, like you weren't contributing to it. So had you been contributing to it that whole time, I mean, that would have been a huge amount of money that you kind of just save without even thinking about it. So I think like as a starting point, we've gone other ways, and we've cashed out our 401ks to invest in, real estate and all that, and that works for us. But yeah, I think if nothing else, like at least to be doing something like that is great.
Yeah, there's definitely more than one reason why we don't love the 401k, but there's a lot of reasons to really like it. At the same time, we're focusing on other, I don't want to call them more high level, but kind of a little bit better, a little more advanced strategies.
It's just different strategies.
Different. Yeah, it's just different.
Yeah.
Not as simple. Some people just like simple, and that's nice.
Yeah. Well, and even for me, had I not been contributing to the 401k when we went to go buy this property that we bought, there's no way I would have saved as much money just on my own as I did, just because it was like this thing I didn't even have to think about. It's just like it just went. And a lot of hospitals will do matches. So if there's an opportunity for any kind of match, you should definitely be taking advantage of that, because that's essentially free money that you're getting from your organization.
Yeah. It's hard to get 100% return on investment, but 401k matches are 100% return on investment.
And then when it came time to retire early, were you retiring early just because you could and you were ready to get out, or did it have anything to do with starting the podcast and wanting to? Because you said you started the podcast after you had already retired, so I guess those were not necessarily related.
Yeah, I knew my last year of work that I was going to start the podcast. So, it just took some planning. I retired in January of 2022, and then I really started the whole process of setting up the podcast, and how was I going to find my guests, and what was I going to talk about, and just doing all the research. Yes. And then getting all those episodes in the can, and then finally launching in July. So, retiring early, I could financially, and I was ready. I had already worked 40 years at the same institution, 36 of those years as a nurse. I didn't start the podcast to supplement my income, because that hasn't happened.
Yeah.
That was a question we were going to get to.
Oh yeah, and
it's not as lucrative as everyone thinks.
Right there. Like, have you monetized your podcast? And I haven't, and that's by choice, because first of all, I say I don't have anything to sell, right? I don't have anything to sell, so that's just the honest answer to that. I have thought of recently, through the advice of a very wise person. She said, "Why do you need to make money for yourself?" She said, "What about starting like a nonprofit, or like a 403c, or whatever they're called?" And I thought, you know what, that's something that would interest me. That might be something down the road. But yeah, no, I pay money to have a podcast every month. I'm not making any money.
Yeah, and we're in that same boat too right now, and it's like as
not by choice. When we were first starting, we were trying to get her on as much as we could, but oh man, it's hard enough for me and Colin to coordinate schedules, just with the 2-hour time difference, and we're both working in the hospital still, and it's fun. Just trying to coordinate that with one more person just would have been so tough.
Like, we're out here trying to be promoting financial awareness and like making good financial investments and moves. Like short term, this podcast, just strictly financially, is not a good investment for us. I mean, we're just, I don't want to say dumping money.
Very bad investment. Sure is.
But you know, in terms of the people we're meeting and the network we're building, and you know, whether or not we can monetize it. I mean, obviously we just want the podcast to sustain itself eventually. That's our goal. It's like, we're not trying to become rich off this podcast.
If it was free to do, we'd do it forever.
Yeah, exactly. But yesterday, Jen and I actually met up with Stacy Stiganga, Invest for Freedom RN. We had lunch with her, brunch, I guess, yesterday in Napa. And it was just so cool to connect with another nurse that we've interviewed on the podcast and we've seen on Instagram, and those kind of experiences and interactions are definitely like make this all worth it, because that's in the end, that's what we're trying to do. We just want to connect with other people and hopefully connect other people to each other. So I think you're achieving the same thing through yours. So you're paying the price.
Yeah, it's a creative endeavor, and I feel like I've always been a creative person, whatever I did. And I feel like having a podcast is definitely a creative endeavor, just with all the steps that you have to go through and the freedom that you have to set it up how you want, to do the interviews how you want, to do the social media, you know, writing the intros, whatever it is. The publishing, the editing. I find the editing really quite fun. So I might be strange in that way, but I enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, I've always said that I'm like an old soul. So like all this social media and technology stuff is not. It's a bit like intimidating and overwhelming for me. You know, you being a couple years older, did you find it pretty tough and overwhelming to get into this? Because, you know, starting off, like, I don't know if you had social media prior to all this, but, you know, to be going into social media and podcasts and editing and all that stuff, you know, at 57, that's a big undertaking. How'd you find that?
Are you saying I'm old?
I'm saying you're older than me.
That's not what I heard. Just kidding.
I'm saying you're older than me, and I feel old.
I know, you know.
Not in a lot of ways, but when it comes to technology.
When I was working on the unit, I was the one that the young nurses were calling when they had tech issues. They wouldn't even call IT.
Oh, wow.
They would call me. And that was such a compliment. But I just learned how to figure things out. And I did have social media before the podcast. I had a Facebook. I still have a Facebook. I'm not on there a lot. I had a personal Instagram. But then when I had to set up my podcast Instagram, it just was a little bit different because it's considered a business Instagram, even though I'm paying Instagram to have my business designation, right? But yeah, it just was trial and error, just a lot of trial and error. And it didn't help that Instagram changes the way they do things, you know, so often. It's like, well, now you can post this, but now you try to boost this post and now it won't boost because you have tappable elements in it. And I'm like, what the hell are tappable elements? I've always had the same things in it, you know, so they constantly keep you on your toes. And I just, you know, I Google a lot of things. I can't go to my daughter, who is 38 years old. I can't go to her for any tech advice because she has absolutely zero tech savvy at all, which I think is just hilarious. I'm like, you are supposed to be the one that has all the tech savvy. It's your generation. She's just like, nah, I don't want any of it. So I've just had to figure it out, trial and error.
I mean, now we know who to go to with all of our Instagram problems.
I was thinking the same thing. I was like, now we have our resource. We're just going to go. Hey, Michelle.
Tappable elements. That's
I've never
over my
heard
head
of that
already. Like I just post. Sometimes it does well, but most of the time it doesn't.
Yeah, it's really satisfying. I live next door. I have some awesome neighbors, and one of my neighbors, she's 18. She's just starting her business. She makes beads. She's a glass blower, but she has an Instagram. She has quite a good following. She's has like over 3,000 followers already. But she was complaining kind of through her Instagram that she wasn't getting messages. And so I went in and I helped her, and she was in sleep mode and she didn't even know it. She's getting all of her messages, which she has a business, so she's getting orders through there and so forth. And for me to be able to do that, for a 60-year-old woman to be able to help an 18-year-old navigate Instagram, I was really proud of myself.
Yeah, that would be me. That would be I think I'm like more on your daughter. I'm 38 as well, and I think I'm right in line with your daughter. Just like, I don't want anything to do with this. And of course, we've jumped into a couple different businesses that are very highly reliant on social media. So
Required.
we're stuck now, but I fight it. So now we know. We're going to put you down as our IT person going forward.
Super user.
So saying all that, and the experience that you've had, would you recommend this, starting a podcast to somebody if they're thinking about it?
I certainly would. The medium is great. So many people listen to podcasts, and it's just a way to reach so many. And it's fairly easy. I will say that it's fairly easy to start a podcast. Yeah, there are some things, like everything in life, but if you want to reach a lot of people and do it fairly painlessly, I think podcasting is the way to go.
That was something that kind of, I don't want to say we struggled with, but something that I kept looking at. So you look at the numbers and you're like, 50 downloads, that's not great. Or even like an Instagram post, 50 views. Like, you think that's terrible. But then every time I'll see like a little post on Instagram and it shows what 50 people in a room looks like. And that's actually pretty significant. You can, if you could only help out 50 people with each episode, that's kind of what I look towards. We have a few more downloads than that occasionally, but no, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. No, but that was early on, and it did take a little motivation to get me past the initial first steps, and we got past it, and we're better for it.
Those are that's external validation, right? The download numbers, the number of followers, the likes, all of that's external validation. And it's so easy to get swayed by that, I guess. And I think you have to really look at internal validation. Like, why are you doing this? What is your purpose? What do you want to say? What message do you want to get out? What do you want to showcase? How many people do you want to help financially? Whatever your goal is. So I think looking at those internal drivers, it's much more satisfying. You can kind of ignore all the external things. I mean, I'm guilty of it. Do I get excited when I turn on my Instagram and I have, 35 new followers? I'm like, oh my gosh, why? Why would
the tappable elements are working? I'm just kidding.
Sometimes, right? Yeah, I know, but yeah, it's easy to get into that, but we have to just remember our why. And I think there's so many parallels in nursing, right? We have to remember our why. Why are we doing this? Why are we working this hard? Nursing is not easy. It is not. If you think I'm going to have an easy job, I'm going to have an easy life, I'm going to be a nurse. Nobody ever says that. No nurse has ever said that. So you have to remember your why. Why am I doing this? Why am I, yeah, just always go back to that. It won't lead you wrong.
I think the hardest part is deciding in your own mind, what is your why? So maybe becoming really clear on that before you start something. And that way you can keep falling back on that if you have questions.
And I think for us too, like the why that we came to was like, we'd always listen to podcasts, and just as we were doing it, we thought, that would be a cool thing to do, to, start a podcast network, all that. But then as we were trying to kind of get around to what our podcast would be about and who we would want to reach out to or, help, we just saw this hole in nursing. And so that kind of became and shaped our why, and just getting this information out to nurses.
Well, there are so many of us, right? Like in our state, in our country, in our world, and I think collectively we're all kind of suffering the same things, and we could just all benefit from hearing each other's story and from experts like yourselves. I know I've talked to quite a few financial nurses that are investors. I know you guys had Savannah Arroyo on your podcast, and I, I told Josh the same thing. It's like, why don't nurses invest more outside of nursing? For me, it definitely was fear. Here's an example. When I met my husband and we got married in 2001, we both had homes, right? I had the house that I had with my child, with my daughter. He had his house. And then remember what happened in 2008 when the mortgage bubble burst, right? Um, if we had kept those homes and sold them in like 2006 or 2007, that would have been a really good investment. And we didn't do it because we had no framework, we had no knowledge, and we had a lot of fear. So I think fear stops a lot of people from doing things that would really benefit them.
And a lot of times the fear just comes from a lack of knowledge. And that's why we're trying to help bring a little more knowledge every episode.
Yeah, it's so important for you to get that out there, because the more people hear it, the less scared they are, and they think, hey, I can do this.
All right. So I think we'll head into the final 5. I'm not sure if you're familiar with our format, but we ask the same 5 questions for each episode. So I am going to start out with number 1. These are all geared towards finances, but if you have an answer framed outside of the financial aspect, fire away. All right. So the first one is, what is a top financial resource you found, or where do you go to educate yourself?
Oh man, I usually call my broker and I say, hey, what do you think about this? And then
That's what they're there for, right?
right. Yes, call someone you trust. And I know this person very well. We went to grade school together, so it's been a long relationship, and and he's trustworthy. So that's who I call.
Yeah, call somebody who's done it before, whether it's your broker, relative, us, DM us. Yeah, honestly, somebody who's done what you are looking to do.
So the second question is, what advice would you give yourself as a new grad?
Oh man, a new grad, financially or just any advice?
Both.
So don't do what your parents did. Be a little bit more forward thinking and find the resources that you need. Don't be so afraid financially. And then just personally, maybe don't stay with the same place for 40 years. Expand a little bit, see what else is out there in the world.
Did you get I know one of the nurses I work with who's been here for 25 or 30 years, she got a little pin, and every day she can get a free coffee, which is like $1.50. And I'm like, come on, guys, like for 25 years, you can't do a little better than that.
Sounds kind of like a nurse week gift, right?
Yeah, it's like
exactly.
It's a pizza party on steroids or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. The third question is, what excites you about the next 12 months?
Wow. Oh, that's a loaded question. Just the possibilities. I don't know. Just the possibilities. I feel like usually not knowing things scares the crap out of me, but sure now, I don't know if it's because of my age. I'm just like excited. I get to find out.
Yeah, that's got to be an interesting shift once you retire, especially after you've been working for 40 years to just have this, kind of not knowing what this next year is going to look like or anything. So the fourth question is, how do you define success?
I think success is just doing what you want to do and feeling happy with it, feeling pleased, just feeling like you made a difference somehow.
All right. The final question is, you kind of alluded to what I think might be your answer today, but what's the biggest financial mistake you've made, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, definitely not investing earlier, and whatever it is, and having too much fear. So I missed a lot of years of investing with my institution. They were matching 401k.
I think that seems to be a common theme. It's like people obviously have some specific things that maybe they messed up, like in your case, that the 401k, but everybody is just like earlier. I wish I started sooner. I wish I, bought that house or whatever, but it was always a time thing usually.
Mhm. And it doesn't even have to be a ton, just to get into the habit of it. Like whether it's 2% of your income, like I think everybody should be able to afford, especially as a nurse, 2% of your income going into retirement. Should be more, but that's
I was gonna say
just to get into the habit.
At least whatever the match is.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you for joining us today. If people are looking to find you, where can they find you?
Well, thank you guys for having me. So they can find me on my website, theconversingnurse.podcast.com. Over at Instagram, I am at the Conversing Nurse Podcast, and on LinkedIn, where I find many of my wonderful guests, I'm just there as Michelle Harris.
Check us out on Instagram, the Conversing Nurse. I said almost the Investing RN Pod, where we put up some content about nursing, about real estate, about investing.
Check out the Conversing Nurse Podcast too.
Yeah,
since that was our guest.
She's a great interviewer as well. I was on that podcast several months ago. It was good.
Yeah.
So we're on YouTube, we're on Instagram, we're on TikTok. It's like roller coaster of emotions recently.
I don't know anything about that.
I don't either, but we're back. We're on all audio platforms. Like, subscribe, share, all the stuff. Catch you next week.